Welcome to today's lesson, lesson 5 on research designs, an important topic in our course on research methods. My name is Professor Kennedy Mutundu, an associate professor of anthropology at Mount Kenya University. Today's lesson on research designs, we want to accomplish the following. We want to ensure that we know and understand the purpose and characteristics of research designs. We are able to distinguish between research approaches, research designs, and data collection methods. We also want to ensure that we are able to explain the basis of classifying research designs, because there are many different types of research designs. How do we classify them and on what basis? Then finally, we should be able to not only classify research designs, but also be able to explain these different categories of research designs by using different examples and how they are applied. Our lesson outline for today, we start by defining what research design is, the purpose of research designs, the research process, how research designs are classified, the characteristics of each classification. Then we will go into the main presentation of the class by looking at three main categories of research designs: experimental designs, descriptive designs, and exploratory designs. Research, from our previous lessons, we know is a project, like any other project. A project of constructing a house, a project of making a trip, a project of repairing a building, a project of preparing a class. So like any other project, you must have a purpose for that project. You must have activities for that project. You must be aware of the resources that you have for that project. You must keep in mind the specific objectives you have for that project. And finally, you must be able to know that these results have come out of that project, and have I achieved my objectives or not? If you consider that, then you must have a plan for it. And the plan starts with having the plan in your head, in your mind as an idea, and that's the conceptual component of the research, having the idea itself, and then the practical aspect of the research, so that you move beyond just having the idea, but also having the practical aspect of the research. So if we look at this, then the design is very important, because it can be said to be the scheme that explains your research, a plan, a blueprint, a model, a framework, a strategy. All this can explain what a research design is. Ideally, it is a representation of what you are going to do, either in terms of an idea or in practice. It is a guide, it's a structure that all other components of research fit in, and it's also a process of all the activities. As a strategy, it is an overall plan of action. A strategy is a plan of action that you choose to integrate different components of research that I named earlier. These different components need to be integrated, because one component affects the other towards a coherent and logical way of achieving your objectives. And you do this not just for the sake of it, but you do this because you have a research problem in mind and you have got certain specific objectives in mind. A blueprint means that you need also to control all the factors that can affect research, the research process, and all factors that can affect how the data is being collected and which data is ideal and not ideal. Data collection is important. The types of data that you want to collect must be informed by the objectives that you have, and the types of data also must be framed in such a way that you also know how the data is going to be collected and how the data is going to be analyzed. So the research design helps you to accomplish that. So what is the purpose of research designs again, and the research process itself? It is a model and a representation of the actual research. So it's a model and a representation of the actual research. So if you had it in a paper on one page, it can give you a model of how this is supposed to. Just like a building, you can have a design for it or a model of that building. People who do architecture, they represent the building they construct in the form of a model. So the design is also a model for research. As I said, it's also conceptualization. So it's not just the physical aspects of what you are going to do, the activities of research, but it also represents the idea itself and the practice. As I said again, it is a framework of research, organization, configuration, and relationships between the different aspects of research. As a guide, it provides the sequential process. Research is sequential, made up of different steps, and because it's a guide, it allows you to understand the steps through which research is going to be accomplished. And of course, the integration of the many different aspects of the research process. As a checkmate, you think about the objectives that you have, then you ask yourself, is this design going to ensure that I accomplish those objectives? So the design is like a checkmate, controls your objectives and controls your activities to ensure that those activities are met through the objectives. It prescribes also the methods and techniques. Research is a process through which you have got many options. A research design helps you to choose from the many methods that you have and techniques so that you choose the most ideal techniques and methods of accomplishing your objective. Then we are interested in collecting valid information, information that is evidence-based, and information that is reliable, that you can do reliably, and information that is also valid. A design is supposed to guide you in asking that question, is this information valid or not valid? And research is expensive. Research is expensive in terms of time and material resources. You want to pick a design that you are going to invest certain levels of resources, but also be able to get out of that process value for what you have invested in. So in summary then, we know that research is an idea, so it's a conceptual framework that helps you to understand what the research process is about. A design is also an activity, so you have to put in mind that the research that you are conducting is an activity and how those activities are going to be accomplished. We know that now research design is also a plan for how you're going to go about your research. It's also a framework within which different components of research can fit in. And then again, research design is a procedural framework within which all the activities are supposed to be accomplished. How can research designs be classified? How do you classify the different designs? I have 7 of the different ways in which research can be classified, or research designs can be classified. First and foremost, we need to ask ourselves about the degree of the research question that you have. Is it a big research topic, or is something that you want to accomplish within a short period of time? That's what you call research question crystallization. We'll explain a little bit about that a little more. Then the purpose of the study, then whether the researcher has control over the variables or not. We have the aspect of time. Then we have got the research environment itself, then the scope of the topic, and then finally the method of data collection. We'll go through each of these to understand how to classify research designs and how to explain the different research designs. In terms of the degree of the question, there are 2 ways of looking at this. We have what you call exploratory studies, and then you have got a formal study. In terms of the research question crystallization, some studies are at a very basic level of just exploring, exploratory. It's not nonetheless exploratory because it is basic and simple, but it's just for purposes of discovering some information that can be used for future research tasks. So the immediate purpose is to develop some hypotheses and assumptions within which to work with. So in terms of time and scale then, exploratory research is limited. Formal study or formal research is the real study, on which now you have to select methods and get into full-scale research process. So you can develop research designs that fit into exploratory studies, or you can develop a research design that fits into a real formal study. This is what we call research crystallization. Next is the purpose of the study. Designs are chosen on the basis of the purpose of the study. Some research is done, designs are developed to simply report. And in reporting, you summarize data, you recast the data, and you simply want to communicate. You don't want to analyze, you don't want to interpret what you are finding out, you simply want to report information. Just like journalists do, they report information. Then you have got some journalists that analyze information and bring in different components of information to analyze. Then you go beyond just reporting, but to also describe something in detail. Designs that describe things in detail or topics in detail get into who did what, where it was done, how it was done, and where it was done. So there's more of detail when you are describing something or describing a research problem. Then, beyond just describing, then, you may have the intention of explaining things, like the causal-explanatory designs, which are concerned with the questions of why. Not just how things or what things or when things, but also why things happen. So you give reasons. And to do this, then, you have to develop a model or a design that will help you to answer the question of why. So explanation of relationships, not just explaining and giving and describing things, but explaining the different relationships between things. Then you have got causal-predictive, meaning that you not only explain, but you develop a design that in different situations and circumstances, you are able to predict that a model, if you did this or that, you can be able to predict that. That's what you call causal-predictive. So designs are classified according to the purpose of the study. Next, we can also classify research designs on the ability of the researcher to control variables. Variables are the different components that we are interested in. Any research problem has got different components. For instance, under the ability of the researcher to control variables, in experimental designs, the researcher has a better control and manipulation of the variables. When you look at the examples, it simply means that you as a researcher, you can decide when you will combine one or two variables, how one variable can affect the other, and therefore you have got manipulation of what's happening. And in other cases, you may not be able to do this. If you are interested in a historical phenomenon, something that happened in the past, then you do not have control over what happened. So the researcher has nothing to do with that. You only describe and explain things. That's what we call ex post facto design, meaning that things are beyond your control, you cannot manipulate them, so you have limited control over the variables. Then research also can be classified, or designs can be classified on the basis of the time in which you are interested in, the time dimension. You can be interested in a research problem that is current and in the state in which it is, meaning that you are only doing what you call a cross-sectional study. You carry it out at once and it's specific to a certain period, or you are interested not just in one period, but in terms of how the researcher captures information at different times. So the longitudinal design enables you to capture information, explain things through different times, and observe change. Cross-sectional studies are not particularly interested in change. Longitudinal studies are interested in change and how the variables change from one form to the other and how they affect one another at different times. So you can also classify research designs on the basis of time dimension. You can also classify research in terms of the research environment in which you are operating in. There is research that is conducted in a laboratory, which means that it's a highly controlled environment. The possibility of other factors interfering with your research is limited. So laboratory settings, you have a better control of certain factors, especially the natural sciences. There are so many factors that can affect an event, but when you're in a laboratory, you can decide the temperature that you are going to operate in, you can decide the chemicals that you want to, you have control over those variables. In contrast to that research environment, you do it out in the field and in social settings where you do not have control over the variables. Then the topic of scope. There are some studies that are statistical in nature. You are interested in generalization. You're not interested in specific things. You're interested in how a representation can speak on behalf of other things. That's a statistical studies. And things that are generalizable, you can transfer your conclusions from one point to the other or from one case to the other. Alternatively, the topic could be specific to a case, and therefore you cannot generalize and transfer your findings to another context. Then finally, research designs can be classified on the level of the method of data collection. You can collect data by observing, and you are independent from what is happening. You can observe things and record, especially in the laboratory. You are not getting feedback through communication. Or you can collect data through communication by asking questions. So in the first instance, you are observing things and recording, and you do not have interaction with the respondents. If you are establishing how many vehicles are on a highway, you don't need to ask the driver or anybody who has a vehicle how many vehicles there are. You simply record the information that you are getting. But if you are interested in finding information about how the process of driving is, if the road is good or not, you'll have to speak to the person. And that's what you call the communication study. So out of all those 7 levels now, you can proceed to classify. As you can see, there are so many variables involved in how to classify research designs. So there are 3 main ways now that you can classify out of all this. Because the designs are many, the methods are also many. How do we go about classifying research designs in such a way that you have control over what the designs are? In our previous lessons, we looked at different approaches, quantitative things, quantitative methods in which you count the data. Data is quantitative, data is numerical, qualitative in the sense that you are interested in the quality of things, qualitative information, or mixed approaches. And how do we fit this now into different research designs? Then you have got the designs themselves. As we'll see, we have experimental designs, descriptive designs, and exploratory designs. Then whether the methods of data collection, the tools of collecting data, are quantitative or qualitative. Then again, designs in terms of the purpose, whether the sampling framework is purposive sampling or non-purposive sampling. And in doing this, we put into consideration that these things can be mixed, all these levels can be mixed, approaches, designs, and the methods of data collection and sampling. You need to be careful in terms of which one you are going to use and apply to which. So after this then, let's see how these different designs can be explained. The first one is experimental designs. Experimental designs, as you can see, come from the word experiment. You are conducting an experiment. And when an experiment, the use of the word experiment comes to our mind, we only think of experiments in a laboratory. But no, in terms of research designs, experiments are not just done in the laboratory. Experimental designs are designs that can also be applied in the field and on aspects that are not in the laboratory. But keep in mind that it is experimental. So it brings you the idea that things are observable. You can predict things, you can observe things, you can count things, you can have evidence for things. So in other words, you are interested in higher levels of validity and higher levels of reliability and higher levels of control over what you are doing. So research experimental designs use methods where the researcher manipulates. And in social sciences, in physical sciences, you manipulate. You control the amount of oxygen. You control the amount of a particular chemical. You know the amount you're going to use. But in social sciences, you are not able to do this. So you can say you can define and isolate what you are studying. And therefore, you can be able, from isolating that, you are able to measure. And in social sciences, we don't just measure things because behavior cannot be measured. We deduce or infer the effect of that particular component on other components. In experimental designs, we are not just interested in how things are, we are interested in relationships between what you are studying. So the relationships in terms of whether one component of what you are studying is what leads to the other component, that is a causal relationship, or simply that the relationship is how things are related. We may not have a causal relationship. We may not have one factor having an effect on the other factor, but they are simply related. That's what we call correlational. Then there are two types of experimental designs. We have what we call the true experimental designs, and the true experimental designs are mostly the designs that take place or are performed in a laboratory. In this case, you have got high level of validity because you can be able to see things, you can be able to observe things, you can be able to verify, you can be able to predict. So in true experiments, you have a high level of validity, and this validity is also ensured by also having higher level of randomization, meaning that you do not select the subjects of your study by influence, you select them randomly. And when you select things randomly, it means that you don't influence what you are studying. Then you have control, and you can be able to manipulate the variables. So laboratory experiments are good examples of true experimental designs. Then you have got what we call quasi-experimental designs, where ethically and in terms of logistics, you cannot take human beings to a laboratory. You cannot manipulate the behavior of people. You want to study the effects of certain things in society. You can logically not be able to do that. You cannot contain people in a laboratory. So you apply. But you are also interested in validity. How do you go about this? You ensure that you ensure your validity by having two components of your variables. You have one which is what you call the experimental group, and the other one which is called the control group, so that you study the experimental group and see how certain variable is affected or has an effect in that experimental group. But it's not a laboratory. You are not able to control what happened. If you're not able to control what happened, then you apply what you call quasi-experimental designs. Let's see a little more on what these experimental designs are in terms of examples. 1, 2, the first 3 bullets are what could be called true experimental designs. For instance, you are interested in an experiment to determine the effects of new pharmaceuticals or a drug or a vaccine on diseases. That is something that you can apply a true experimental design because you have control over what type of medicine to use, and you can be able to observe and record the effects that that drug has on somebody. So you have got control over that. That's a true experiment. Then you have got experiments to determine the effect of light or nutrients on crop yields in a greenhouse. You can control temperature, you can control which types of nutrients are being used, you can control water and have control over that. That's a true experiment. Or an experiment to establish the effect of a new teaching method. Now that's different. A new teaching method, you are not able to control the behavior of the kids you are teaching or the students you are teaching in a class. You're also not able to decide and say that I'm going to have this experiment only applicable to a certain number of students. This becomes difficult. So that becomes what we call quasi-experimental design. If you're interested in establishing how a certain type of food supplement has on the effect on obesity in young children, you are not able to determine what these young children are eating outside the experiment. You cannot hold them in a laboratory, and again, you cannot be able to determine and control other factors such as genetics. So you can only do what you call a quasi-experiment. Or you are interested in a study to establish a certain type of marketing strategy that improves the sales of a product. Again, markets are affected by so many factors. You do not have control over that. So the design that you can adopt is what you call the quasi-experimental design. But in both cases, what is the process? One is that we are interested in subjects, the subject of your study. Say the subject of your study is a sick person. If you are interested in a vaccine, a sick person is the subject of your study. Now, in that sick person, you are interested in the independent variable. The independent variable will be the treatment, the medicine, or the vaccine that you want to apply. Then, the dependent variable is the outcome, if the person becomes healthy or not. In experimental design process, a true experiment is that you have one group where you will apply the treatment to, and another group which you will not apply the treatment to. So after that, you are able to say, I applied this treatment to this group of patients, and then this was the outcome. The other component of, and this is what we refer to as the experimental group, the one group that you are applying a treatment, and the control group which you are not applying the treatment. So you'll be able to see the results of what would happen to the experimental group and what would happen to the control group. Treatment is an important concept, is the application or the intervention that you want to measure. In this case, if you're interested in a vaccine, that is the treatment that you are giving to the experimental group and leaving out the control group. In experimental designs, you can use both quantitative techniques, but again, these experimental designs are not always amenable to qualitative designs. Quantitative techniques of collecting data, measuring things, quantifying things are more applicable to experimental designs than to any other designs. And finally, let's look at the different types of experimental design. One of these could be you are just interested in one group, say a group of patients in a particular area, in a particular region. So you put this group of patients together, and what you do is that you apply a treatment, a vaccine, and see what happens after using that vaccine. This is what we call the one-shot case study. This study is limited in the sense that you did not have an understanding of how this group was before you applied the treatment. But it can tell you something, that if you apply that treatment, if you apply that intervention, something changes. But if you want to have a higher level of understanding and validity, then you do the next one, which is called one group pre-test and post-test design, meaning that in that group of patients, you establish how those patients were before you gave the treatment. Then you give the treatment and then again observe the effects of that treatment. So you are able to compare the status of that patient or those patients before the treatment and after the treatment. You can now raise this a little more now again and say that you are not just interested in one group, you are interested in two groups. In this case, you will do what we call post-test only control group design, in which case these two groups of people, you apply this treatment, and in the control group, you don't apply that treatment and observe the results. Then you have got the two groups, the pre-test and post-test control group, whereby now in both cases, both the experimental group and the control group, you establish the status before the treatment and then establish the status after that. So to that point then, we are able to understand the different designs. We see that different designs are informed and classified on the basis of different factors, including the purpose of the study, including the types of methods that you are going to use, including the time that you are interested in. You are also interested in the environment in which a research design is made. And there are three main categories of research designs: experimental designs, descriptive design, and also exploratory design. We have looked at experimental designs, and in our next lesson, we'll look at descriptive research designs. Thank you for today. We'll meet in our next class.
We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.